Hi, and welcome to Drafting Compliance. I'm Kayne, he's Tom, and we talked about the EU DORA last time. Today, we're talking about AI and regulations with special guest Dustin Wilcox, CISO at a Fortune 20 global health company, and Tom's brother. You can tell the family resemblance there.
That's right. He
But
got
before we
the
get
hair.
to that, oh, that's what happened, Tom. Thank you. Before we get to that, we do have some beers. What are we drinking today, Dustin?
This is the Pilot Rock Porter from Ashland, Oregon. Caldera, I believe, is the brewer.
It is the brewer. And Kayne, just because I like to educate you, do you know why these beers are called a porter?
Yes, actually, I do know this one. I am terrible at trivia generally, but it's because this was breakfast for porters because they had a long day ahead of it themselves. And because of the soul-crushing nature of their work, they decided they had to stay drunk at all times.
Well,
close?
close. A porter is actually pretty dense in nutrients, so it actually had enough sustenance to keep them going all day. So that's why a porter is a porter. So you'll notice it being a bit thicker beer.
It's not just for breakfast anymore, though.
Yeah, that's right. Not just for breakfast anymore. So let's crack these.
And I will say I'm wearing my readers today. So it says go biking, go fishing, go skiing. Please don't do any of those after you've drank one of these, though, folks. Let's keep it real. We're going to open these up. Oh, okay.
Ooh,
hello.
I already got the scent. Ooh, that one's getting a little messy on you, Kayne.
Yeah. Oh, boy. We'll get a pour in there. Oh, this looks like the stuff I use for toilet bowl cleaner. You just pour some cola down the toilet.
Oh, I don't know about you, but
the same properties.
That has a fantastic head on it when you pour it.
It's beautiful.
And making it work. This is like a Guinness commercial at this point, right?
I don't know if you can smell anything yet, Kayne, but this has really rich, like toasted malt notes.
Yeah, like
got
those.
Got your usual porter
balls.
caramel.
Yeah, caramels. Yep. I don't get much chocolate. Sometimes you get a little chocolate in these, but
no, it's mostly just a malty smell.
But the denseness of the head on it, it almost looks like bread. I mean, it's just so dense.
Yeah.
You should get some breading
dark too. This is not at all the type of thing that I can see through. Even a little bit. Light does not penetrate this.
All right, let's go.
How much do we talk about and when do we get to drink it?
Well, let's take a drink.
Usually that's what happens. That's why I show up for the show.
Oh, you can taste the chocolate and coffee notes.
Yeah, it does have a lot of coffee in it, actually.
Kayne, of the many things that I've learned from Tom is I've become a beer snob. This is pretty good beer.
Yeah, this isn't bad at all.
Well, it just died in my mouth. That is.
So a couple things about this. You're not getting nearly the hop character that a lot of the beers we drink, Kayne, the ones that you like, I think the most are hoppy. And this isn't that.
When you have like really bad hotel coffee, Tom, like the stuff that's been percolating in the pot for about 12 hours and you're desperate and it's cold, if you add some carbonation, you've got that flavor profile right here.
Yeah, it does have some bitters to it. Sometimes you'll find porters to be a little sweet. This one is not sweet.
No,
I don't mind that at all.
Sweet.
Actually, I'd rather it not be sweet, but
it does have that hearty bread taste to it.
I mean, maybe I'm judging too harshly. I am going to try again just to see.
Second time's the charm.
Nope, it didn't get any better. It did not get any
really
better.
Good.
You have a very expressive beer face, Kayne.
Oh, my goodness me. Still, though, it is not that. Remember that can with the Kauai cinnamon bun sticky ale? That's the only time Tom ever let me pick a beer for this show. Ever since then, we have stopped because it turns out
hands down the worst.
It was possibly the worst thing we've ever had on the show.
Although I still have excellent judgment. Yeah.
Well, I think actually our production team sent us this one here, as well as our nifty glasses, and you got one of those too, Dusty, right?
I did, as a matter of fact.
Fantastic. We can almost make out the Hyperproof Drafting Compliance logo. Well, let's get into it. We've still got some beers. You guys can certainly work through those. We've seen a lot of AI regulations come out lately. And multiple attorneys general have weighed in on how AI needs to comply with existing privacy laws. And so you think about the Oregon AG, they just came out with some guidance. I know Colorado's AG has come out with some laws, actually, and I know that California's AG has been pushing this narrative as well on compliance with existing privacy laws. So how do you see the balance between leveraging AI technologies while still ensuring compliance with privacy laws as we move into this, AI powered future?
It's a good question. It's one of those questions we could probably spend an entire podcast talking about. I think the first thing to note, Kane, is that the regulation we're seeing so far, and this is true every time we see a sort of a new black box technology come out.
Mm-hmm.
First, we start seeing regulation evolve that is administrative in nature. It's the business problems. It's certainly real problems, but they're not the security problems. It's things like making sure we have transparency, making sure we ferret out bias, all these things we need to make sure that we do with AI. It's those controls. It's not likely going to be until we see a major security breach that involves AI that we'll start to see sort of the punitive regulation that comes out that isn't security regulation. From my perspective, we can learn a lot from how we saw regulation evolve for other technologies, cloud and internet and other things, and hopefully start building some controls today that get us ahead of where the regulation is going to evolve tomorrow.
Yeah, I actually agree pretty closely, which shouldn't be a surprise. One thing I'll note is I would say for the first time in this discussion, we're starting to see some of that punitive sort of thought process bubbling up. And what I think is interesting is it stems from the fact that Deepseek stole the data from OpenAI, which in turn stole it from all of the creators of the content.
Allegedly.
Allegedly.
We don't have verified sources.
What's interesting is that chain of theft is what's getting people to start to notice that, hey, there is a punitive piece to AI, especially the generative AI, and we need to start paying attention. The other thing I'll just add is when you talk about how do you balance between AI technology and the regulatory world, the first thing as CISOs is we've got to remember we're here to enable the business, right? So we have to intake that regulation, but at the same time, we have to find a way to balance that in such a way where we enable our businesses to be more productive. And that's really the promise of AI. I'm not sure I've seen it in practice be particularly productive, but I do believe that's coming. And so we as CISOs have to find that fine line and make sure we walk it appropriately.
Yeah, and Dustin, I want to go back to something you'd said
let me add on to what Tom was saying,
okay.
If I can,
We're all
I hate to interrupt
now.
you. No, but he's getting to I think an important point, and that is even with the absence of real sort of security regulation around AI, that doesn't mean that we don't have to worry about securing AI, right? In fact, I think it's quite the opposite is true. The better we can secure AI unilaterally ourselves today, now all of us across the different industries, particularly as it relates to regulated industries, and I'm in healthcare, I know that side of the business really well, the better our opportunity is to stave off what would be reactive and relatively ignorant regulation done by politicians and not done by security people. And that to me the worst thing that possibly happen right now is we go full bore, we YOLO this our way into AI, start throwing regulated data at it, something really bad happens, and now all of a sudden we set back the sort of beneficial use cases that our patients are going to see through this. We set that back by a decade because we have to spend the next 10 years trying to figure out how to bolt on all this regulation to these AI use cases.
There is so much to unpack in that statement, but I want to go back to something Tom brought into the conversation and tie it back to something you said, Dustin. So you said we needed perhaps a large-scale data breach to incentivize like some lawmaking or so that's how regulations ultimately come into effect. And Tom, you brought Deepseek into the conversation. So I got to ask, like, Deepseek, I have friends who are analysts who have looked at how the model works and how leaky it is, and that it actually is not a self-contained model. It actually sends data outside of its enclave. It sends them to some servers in California that are associated with ByteDance of all people. Isn't that a large-scale data breach right there for those companies that have already decided to toss Deepseek R1 into their environment? I mean, because it's stored on secure Chinese servers. I have to scare quote that one because there is no such thing. Isn't that an example of a large-scale data breach already in progress?
I don't know if you're asking me or Tom, but I would say definitively yes.
Okay.
Not only that, but I've taken the appropriate measures to ensure that that data breach doesn't include any data I'm responsible for.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly say that, from all of the measurements that I know, that's a data breach. But until it gets realized in such a way where the ultimate impacted people are taking notice of it, nothing's going to happen with it from a regulatory. Nobody's going to currently nobody's going to their legislative representatives and saying, "I can't believe you guys are letting Deepseek do this." I think some businesses are, it's some of the big billionaires with a B behind their name. I think they're going and asking for regulatory things that would be in their favor, but we're not seeing the data leakage yet. I think it's going to come. I mean, I think it's obvious that between ByteDance and DeepSeek, for those who don't know, ByteDance is the engine behind TikTok. These are some of the most egregious data scrapers there are out there. And it's been proven that data is being monetized and weaponized in some cases against the American user base. So people should be up in arms about it.
Okay.
All right. Well, from my perspective too, Tom, you could make a really good argument for this not being a data breach in the sense that if you would read through the terms of service,
that's right,
of Deepseek,
they let you know.
People have signed up to that, so they've voluntarily given this data over and done so in a way where it's at the discretion of Deepseek how they're using it, and so they could tell you that this is not a data breach because it was done voluntarily and so on. So it really depends on how we interpret the definition of a breach. And in my way of interpreting is not so much what did you sign up for when you clicked accept the EULA. It is what did you expect your data to be? How did you expect it to be used in that context?
That's a great point.
Well, I want to kind of bring this back to our earlier conversation about healthcare, because that's in your background, Dustin, and also kind of bring in some elements from the GDPR, which is just the gift that keeps on giving ultimately, because a lot of AI, the current saber rattling out of attorneys general is around privacy. So how do you see that GDPR and to maybe a different extent, high trust regulations are influencing the way that organizations are managing their data lineage in large language models? And what are some of the compliance challenges that they're facing right now, especially in healthcare?
Well, when you look at GDPR, and it'd be also true as you look at how U.S. regulation has evolved through California and elsewhere, you start to think about things like right to be forgotten and DSARs and those types of things. And I think you immediately go to a couple of real concerns that we have to get on top of. First one would be I've yet to meet a major enterprise that I think is really good at data inventory, discovering where the data is, what the data is. So when I say inventory, it's where is it, what type of data is it, so it's classification, and then who's using it and how are they using it. When you take that problem and then try to apply it to AI, it just multiplies exponentially. So for me, what that speaks to is a real need to tie data discovery and classification with identity. So the way I'm looking at it is within these AIs, I'm going to have some form of control where as a user of the AI tries to attach data to that AI as a prompt inclusion, for example, I need to be able to dynamically in the moment classify that data. Is it PHI or is it not? And if the answer is yes, it's PHI, then I need to dynamically in the moment reference the identity record of that individual, see if they have the necessary entitlements to use that PHI in that way. If the answer is no, I need to stop the PHI from being attached to the model. If the answer is yes, I need to allow it, and that's how we enable these use cases. At the same time I'm doing that, I need to be creating the signals that become auditable that say, Tom attached PHI to this model. Yes, I checked his privileges and he has the rights to do that, or I stopped him from doing that. That's just one place where I need to be worried about that in the model. I'm also going to need to worry about it on the output. Because Tom may create a resultant data set from that AI interaction and want to share that with other people. I need to make sure those other people have the same rights to that data and so on. So we can go down a real academic rabbit hole on all the different control surfaces of AI and all the places I need to do it. But for me, I'm worried first about the prompt and what's being included there, and then second about the output and what's coming out and who's getting access to it.
Yeah, and I'd just add as as even you have the checks in place that say yes, this user can be in the model. Those user rights that you talked about, Dustin, are going to become exponentially more difficult to execute upon as you have user data being built out in different models. And I think of in your industry where I think predictive AI is probably going to be the golden jewel to go after. But as you're including users' data in that pool by their agreement, eventually one of those users is going to say, you know what, I want to opt out of all that. And how does that impact your model going forward? How do you actually extract it in any echoes of that user out of the model? I think it's a real problem, and I don't think it's a problem that is necessarily easily solved today.
No, I don't
It
think
gets
so,
even worse
Tom.
when you think
Hold,
about.
hold up. I want to go back on
Good.
what Tom said there, because I think some of our audience might not. We're in a bit of an esoterica here. So the way I think of it is like if you're making soup, right? You're going to put in some sausage, you're going to put in some peppers, you're going to put in some potatoes, whatever it is people put in soup, some kind of chicken broth or beef broth, vegetable broth, whatever, and then you're going to add salt. And a lot of these AI makers today seem to have the idea that, well, if you say, well, I'm on a low sodium diet, they'll say, well, we'll just take the salt out. Right? How do you take the salt out of the soup? How do you take it out after the fact, after a model, in this case, has been trained on AI, right? If your model training includes the consent of somebody who gave legitimate consent at a time, like how are you starting to think about this? You brought it in a little bit in the conversation, Dustin, around like GDPR's right to be forgotten or CCPA's right to be forgotten. How is that really affecting the development and deployment of AI when people can ask, hey, I no longer want to be part of this?
It's a fair question, and again, we run the risk here of admiring the problem a little bit, but I'll admire it a little bit more. You start thinking about it too in terms of nested models, AIs referencing other AIs, and how is the data traveling through there. So it's going to come down to we need to evolve the control, and I think the crawl version of the control is it PHI or not? Does the person have the rights to it or not? That's the crawl version. I think
Mm-hmm.
the walk version becomes more like, okay, now where's the data moving within multiple models? Who's being added to the original model, something they call custom GPTs or something like that? And do those same people have the rights to do it? The third part of that, I think, is much more full lineage. Where did the data come from? What kind of
Mm-hmm.
data is it? How has it moved through the environment? And then how can we, hopefully, in some fashion that's a lot easier than it is today, find that record and remove that record when somebody exercises the right to be forgotten?
Yeah, and the real question will become: will the regulations allow us to crawl, run, walk? Right? I mean, at some point, we're going to have to recognize if we want to continue to innovate in this space and make breakthrough data discoveries, meaning the kinds of aha moments that save huge amounts of lives or, in some way enable prosperity on a greater level. We have to get comfortable with the idea at some level that the laws as they exist today, I'm thinking specifically about GDPR and CCPA, but how those laws exist specifically today may not be extensible enough to handle the problem of AI.
Yeah, and I think that came up really in the Paris summit last week. For those of you who are watching this in a recorded format, that'd be in the middle of February 2025, where basically I hate to say it, but we're kind of getting some balkanization in AI regulation and the attitudes towards AI. Europe appears to want to make a safe, ethical AI, and that was something that the final output of the AI conference in Paris came to was a declaration that they wanted to be safe and ethical and private and aligned with European values, as they phrased it. And inevitably, the United States and the United Kingdom did not sign that because they were like, well, that's going to stifle innovation, right? So where do you come down on that when you're thinking about models that you could potentially use? Is something that's maybe safer but possibly slower, has a more structured development model. Is that better for an industry where you're dealing with PHI and a high degree of regulatory controls? Or is it possible to use innovative models that might not have had so many controls imposed upon them during their development cycle?
I think I would object to sort of the premise that we have to have one or the other.
Okay.
I firmly believe that if we give this the proper amount of forethought, we also allow ourselves to start with a certain control set and iterate that control set to get better. I think it's important that we do that, as a matter of fact, because I think if we try to anticipate all the different things we need to control for on day one, we run the real risk of missing something very obvious that the very clever attackers are going to sneak in behind us on. I think we need to be able to be agile and pivot the controls as we start to better understand what the attackers are going to look like. So I'm going to choose to have it all. I want to be safe and ethical, but I also want to be nimble and fast, and I want to enable all these very innovative use cases that I'm hearing thrown around different boardrooms and things like that. Because I think we're just scratching the surface of the benefit that we can receive as a society from this technology. We can't be afraid of it. We also can't be so in love with it that we turn our backs on just the basic foundational controls that need to be in place. We do that, I think we'll all be able to move together as fast as we want to on this.
Well, I think those are all good points. The one thing I'll say is I generally don't believe that any regulation solves a security problem. Compliance, my brother taught me this. Compliance is a waypoint to best practice. So really, regulatory is like a baseline that you should be going after. And in the AI space, it's moving way too fast for regulation to keep up, in my mind. We're going to have to innovate this both at a security and a use case perspective. We have to iterate this at the business level. And as long as we understand that our goal has to be support the business and support the innovation and keep it secure at the same time, I think we'll do it just fine. It's when, big companies, the ones that, tend to forget the moral compass, it's when they get to control the entire direction that becomes a problem. So I do look to, consortiums and bigger private business to help drive that conversation.
But Dustin, you made an interesting point there, and I want to poke at it just a little bit. It sounds like you want to have a balanced model, which I am great. And I threw out, a false, choice between two possible extremes where, everything really ultimately ends up in the middle anyway, in most cases. But you were talking about user identification. You were talking about knowing, here's what data goes in there, and you want to be able to classify it, and you want to be able to classify the end user. We also talked a little bit about threat actors are going to change their tactics. So what are some of the potential risks outside of regulatory things? Like what are some of the risks that organizations face if they're not able to adequately identify who's using their AI system? Right? Is this a standard GDPR claim or a CCPA claim, or is it something more?
Well, there certainly is the DSAR piece of that, the data subject access request piece of that, which is tell me who all has used my data and for what reason they've used it. That would be the first one that jumps to mind. But I think you're prescient in understanding that it goes beyond just regulation; it goes to security as well. I have to be able to control for people's access expanding in an environment, particularly when you're talking about an enterprise environment where people move around all the time. Frankly, I've been to multiple 50-year retirement ceremonies in my own company since I came here in 2018, and the thought of somebody sticking around for 15 years and all the sort of legacy access they will accumulate along the way. And when you want to talk about attack surface of data, and you want to talk about complicating unauthorized access to data, from an insider perspective, both of those things are multiplied by longevity. So person's ability to access data that they maybe needed in their first job, they don't need in their 10th role in an organization, dramatically different. So we have to be able to continue to minimize that attack surface and complicate the unauthorized access to that data. Two of my big strategic pillars.
Yeah, I agree. Kind of the basis question, Kayne, that you asked is like, how big is that problem going to get to be? And I look at the kind of singularity points that are coming. We're watching AI explode right now. We're watching all of the security issues with that. But right around the corner is quantum computing. And when those two things sort of meet, now you're talking about a threat in risk that I don't think any organization is prepared for right now. So in a small way, we're probably a little too focused on AI because it's the capability of compute to get behind AI as this thing scales that really becomes problematic.
Well, Tom, you just dropped I can't leave that one alone. Sorry, you said the words quantum computing. That is, it's like waving a red flag in front of a bull, buddy. 15 years ago, I was told it was 5 years away. Yeah, just today I read that it's just going to be another 5 years. I don't think quantum computing, unless you are a nation state or unless you are regularly being attacked by nation states, I think the only thing you have to start looking at is putting out quantum safe cryptography for these, presumable store and then decrypt later, assuming you've got traffic interception. But I don't think quantum computing is something that I want to bring into the conversation beyond that today, because we could end up massively rabbit holing, and you'll find that I am not a quantum booster. Just not my thing. But I will say this to the audience. If you're enjoying this conversation on YouTube, ring the bell to get notifications about my quest to get any beer that's drinkable. Or subscribe to this in your podcast app of choice to make this show part of your routine. So we've been talking a little bit about security and privacy risks. Dustin, from your perspective, what are some of I want to go hard on large language models for a second, because we've been talking about potential things like using predictive analytics, I think, which is certainly a form of AI, to make diagnostic decisions, and I think that's great. But what are some of the risks to security or privacy if you're deploying a large language model that's using proprietary data and let's make it even funner. Let's say you don't have centralized access controls like you've mentioned are so important. What are some of the risks that an organization could have in that case?
Oh, I think, let's forget about the security risks for just a minute. Let's talk about more what I consider the administrative risks. And one of the biggest ones there is going to be bias. Right, because particularly when you think about a commercial entity taking its data and using it to train the model, because its data is going to be reflective of its customers, that customer base in and of itself is going to necessarily be biased in one manner or another. A good way to think about that is think about a commercial healthcare company doing it. Everybody whose data is in there is going to be an employee at a big company. Mm-hmm. Right, and that itself would create bias within the model, because that is a very particular demographic of people across. And I'm not saying it's a particular race of people. I'm saying it's a particular demographic of people. They're generally going to be more educated. They're generally going to live in different types of communities and those type of things. There are going to be inherent biases in that data, and I think that is a huge problem with this. I think it's going to be a huge problem with any individual entity trying to train a model purely on its own data. I think that's where we have to come up with some mechanism to create broader, we call them omnibus data sets. I need to find a way to connect my company's healthcare data with United Healthcare's healthcare data, with Cleveland Clinic's healthcare data, Mayo Clinic's healthcare data. I want to get the smart data off your smart devices about you. I want to create the broadest and deepest data set for that analytic, because we know that the fidelity of the analytics goes up if I feed them a broader and deeper data set, right? So for me, that's the important thing, is let's not get too enamored with just our data. Mm-hmm. Let's understand what is the entire corpus of data that might be able to help us unlock the butterfly effect for whatever the next question is we're asking of it. For me, those are predictive health questions. And you never know, is it going to be the last 10 years of claims that you had? Is it going to be, the metrics I'm getting off your smartwatch about how many times you're walking a day? What is the butterfly effect to heart disease, to any other different morbidity condition we're worried about? To me, we're never going to really understand the answer to those questions for so many different conditions until we give it the broadest corpus of data.
Okay, but again, you answered with analytics, and my question was on GPTs, like large language models. Right? Do you see any problems that are potentially there for giving a large, because I can totally see the value. Like, I am sold, take my data off my watch. It will tell you I need to sleep more. I'll tell you I need to sleep more too, and probably drink less coffee. But do you see any problems associated with the use of large language models in a healthcare space? Because I can certainly think of some scenarios myself, but I don't want to put words in your mouth.
I see huge ones, and some of them will be the obvious ones that I think if you spend any minute, Googling, threats to AI, you come across, data poisoning. I see that one for sure. So there we have to think about the attack surface of the training data, and have we really locked down who has access to make unauthorized changes to it? There's one I think that most people don't think of yet, and that's going to be sort of the operational risk that it creates. And let me give you a scenario.
Please.
So let's say that and I'm going to make this one up. Let's say that I hire 10,000 nurses for the busiest time of the year, and those nurses are all there to answer the question when the patient calls up to say, "Hey, these are my symptoms. Do I have the flu?" Okay, 10,000 nurses to do that. Now I can train an AI to do that, and I can probably train the AI to do it better based on the conditions than would a normal human being do that. Not only that, if you've seen any of the academic data on this, I can probably train an AI to approximate empathy for the caller. In other words, the caller is going to like talking to the AI better than the person to do that. Now imagine a threat scenario where the threat evolves in such a way that ransomware as we know it today becomes ransoming AI. They figure out a way to get in, put a wrapper around my model, encrypt it, and ransom it. I no longer have those 10,000 nurses to answer those questions. How am I going to provide that service to my patients? Right? And it's a completely made up example, but there's lots of real examples that approximate it. And for me, that's frightening when you think about that. The other one I would give you, Kayne, is let's say I'm really happy with the AI and I no longer feel like I need to hire those nurses. Or I train the AI in the full end-to-end business model and I no longer need 3/4 of my employees. Now think of a scenario where that attacker is able to extract my model, extract my AI, ask it a series of questions, and basically reverse engineer it. And then, heaven forbid, that attacker is a better data scientist than I am. They're able to improve my model. Now they can compete in my industry based on my intellectual property better than I can. They will put me out of business. So the model itself is an attack surface. The training data is an attack surface. The prompt is an attack surface. The prompt inclusions are attack surface, and the output are attack surface. We have to think about the controls for each of those. You get me on my horse on this one. So.
No. And you brought in a really interesting point because I've previously worked in manufacturing in the defense industrial base. And one of the things you learn very quickly is the means by which you make something are way more valuable than the thing that you made. So whether you're making a part or whether you're making an assembly or whether you're making a vehicle, which are all different categories in the DIB, whatever you're making, often what we would see were attacks that were intended on stealing the process by which we made the thing, not the schematic, but the actual how do you manufacture that thing quicker, faster, cheaper. And I think as we've seen with a fairly famous Chinese airplane, where it's the single best example of what would you take if you took a Lockheed Martin and a Boeing and maybe some Rolls-Royce components and bin them all together. You're saying, though, that is a possibility right now that organizations face if they've got AI, where somebody could basically lift and shift their AI and do it faster, cheaper, better. Yeah?
Definitely, if you're using the AI to replicate your business process, as you said, better, faster, cheaper, then all of a sudden that AI becomes a point of vulnerability, a single point of failure, where before you had 10,000 nurses, so you had 10,000 different opportunities or 9,999 to pick up the slack. I think that's a real challenge. And for me, what it does is it puts also a real premium on business resiliency. Mm-hmm. So planning for continuity as you're planning for these AI use cases in ways we've never had to before, because the implications of failing at that are so much bigger.
Yeah, no kidding, especially in a public health emergency. The other thing you're thinking of, and then I want to hear from you on this one, Tom. The other thing I'm thinking of is MGM's ransomware attack that they suffered over the course of, I think it was last year, where they were basically resulting back to pen and paper. Like if you wanted to check in at one of their properties, you would have somebody walk up to you. They would take your credit card number down on a piece of paper, which doesn't sound spooky at all, because they hadn't really trained for that resiliency. You're saying that if an organization had moved a lot of its workforce to be used by generative AI instead of by people, that their resiliency is going to have to test for, I don't know, sudden hiring spikes, which, that's kind of spooky. Tom, bring us back to something happier, please, right?
Well, I don't know if there's anything happier, but when I look at how data is exploding and AI is being adopted at the same time, I'm a little spooked just by the speed of it. And I see organizations take really fat swipes at their working population in favor of AI right now. And in some cases, I think they do it to the detriment of their long-term business. And I think that's a kind of inherent risk to your future if you do that in a business. So I guess what I'm really getting at, Kayne, is we need to be more thoughtful on how we move forward with replacing population, because the end result is you get biased output from an AI engine, you get bad decision making capabilities because you've lost key wisdom within your organization, and you also lose some of the innovative capability that you had as an organization because you've got repeatability through an AI engine, and it isn't necessarily that that predictive AI yet that's saying, okay, how can we do things better? So our adoption rate to me is a little spooky right now.
Yeah, it is. So I want to kind of try and pivot this back to things that work, because I love hearing about that as opposed to doom scrolling. And what are some examples that you can think of, Dustin, where, because you've talked a little bit about data governance, you've talked about identity management, and I totally agree. Like years ago, the company I was at, we had the phrase like identity is the new perimeter, and that phrase has had quite a lot of longevity associated with it at this point. Like, what are some things that you're using as high level of detail as you need to give to make sure that users are operating and interacting with AIs, whether they're generative AIs, whether they're predictive AIs, or whether there's some other type? What are some good practices for data governance and compliance?
I mean, fair question, and I will tell you, just like any sort of evolving technology, what I like to call black boxes, of course, the technical controls to govern that black box are taking quite a while to catch up.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're trying to do right now is what everybody's trying to do, which is sort of bolt on traditional controls to try to give us some semblance of risk management of these technologies. So the first one I would say is DLP is something we've stood in front of a lot of these AIs just to say, stop all PHI, protected health information, from going into them. That was a very good sort of binary control. Is it PHI? Yes, don't let it in. Right. And I think that's been effective for a while, but then you get into the point where the business says, okay, now we need to use PHI. So that control goes out the window. And this is where we're having to be very involved with early stage startups, with innovative thinkers out there, to work with them to help them build out the control sets that candidly we sort of envisioned years ago. As ChatGPT became a thing, we already had our responsible AI program up and running. We already knew sort of the controls we wanted, where we wanted controls and what they needed to do. None of them existed, and still most of them don't. So we're working with a number of early stage startups to say, hey, the thing you're doing is 70% of what we need. Here's the other 30%. If you can build this for us, we will help you with build a market for your product. And I think we're going to make a lot more progress that way than we are going to make having to sort of retrofit legacy controls into the AI environment.
From just a follow-on question, are you seeing any benefit yet from the predictive side of AI? I mean, I've said it already once in this, and that's the promise, right? That's what really, when people think about what could AI bring us to improve society, it's always the predictive side. The stuff we're dealing with today is the convenience side, right? It's the generative stuff. But are you starting to see use cases on that side of AI?
And here you get me dangerously close to another one of my soapboxes, Tom.
Ooh,
And I
goody.
would tell you, I think we've been seeing it for a while. Before I was the CISO of the current global, Fortune 20 healthcare company, I was the CISO of another global Fortune 30 healthcare company. And each of these companies in the space that I operate in have had one or two analytics that they've done better than the others for years. And this other company I was with, there too, they did diabetic and they did neonatal. So it'd be hard to call these AI, but they're really machine intelligence, right? They were machine learning. But what they could do is they could predict who was going to have that leg amputated below the knee because it didn't control their diabetes, or who was going to have what turns out to be a multi-million-dollar neonatal intensive care stay because they didn't do the well baby things they need to do. And they use that information to do some upfront care, and in return they save that back end multi-million-dollar neonatal intensive care stay, right? Those were 2 morbidity conditions in a population of data that probably includes 300. So I've said for as long as anybody's been willing to listen to me that the biggest problem healthcare needs to solve is how do you provide the best care to the most people for the least money. It's that simple. And the answer is those predictive health analytics. Whoever figures out that extensible AI that'll answer the other 298 questions, now it'll think what to ask of them. Whoever does that is going to absolutely win at healthcare.
Yeah, I agree.
If people don't understand, that's going to take that omnibus data set, connecting all of our data together to get the highest fidelity. That's one area where I think our industry needs to evolve, is we need to stop seeing patient data as being intellectual property. It's a raw material, and it is the analytics, it is the insights that we can gain from that data that becomes the differentiator from each of us as a company.
Yeah, I agree. And Kayne won't like me saying it, but when we get quantum computing to focus on that problem, we'll see more results out of that predictive modeling than we do today.
I've held a multi-qubit quantum in my hand before. It's coming, Kayne.
Yeah, it's coming faster rather.
I know it's coming. I just know it's 5 years away. But I want to go back to something you were saying there, Dustin. I want you to I love the premise of this. I really do. I love the idea that a healthcare focused AI could eventually brew a better beer. Let's be honest here. That would be my outcome that would be most beneficial, is better tasting beer, or something that's not as offensive to my taste buds. And it could predict that. But how do you square that with a privacy regime like the EU's GDPR, where they have demands on legitimate right for processing? Like, how are you going, because if you're saying healthcare data, or PHI, in order for that predictive analytics, it has to have access to those data. And yet we have so many encumbrances from the EU, from California, from other privacy-focused entities. How do you square that? Like, what's the key to unlocking that? Is this going to be something where healthcare providers need to work with those regulators to make them understand the long-term societal benefits, as opposed to some of the fear-mongering that I think that they've done in the past? Or is there some other strategy that we can use?
Well, Kayne, what may surprise you, this is a question I've thought a lot about. And it really comes down to, why haven't we solved this already? And the reason we haven't solved it already is there are 2 really big hurdles we have to overcome. The first one is a technical hurdle. So let's say I combine all this data that each of these companies is responsible for into this omnibus data set, and I can run the healthcare analytic, and I can create an output that says, these are the people that are vulnerable to heart disease. Mm-hmm. That output is going to include data from 10 different healthcare companies. So company A should not be able to see the plain text records, patient records of company B, right? So the technology hurdle is, we do not yet have that technology that'll operate at scale and perform at the right level to use that humongous data set in such a way that it's valid for analytics, but protects the confidentiality of the data, the output, vis-a-vis whoever contributed it to the omnibus data set. So the first problem is a technical problem. That is the problem. We thought homomorphic encryption was going to be the answer. Homomorphic encryption does not perform at scale, so we didn't get there. The second question, candidly, solves itself when the first problem gets solved, and that is the regulatory problem. HIPAA and the entire regulatory regime we deal with in healthcare is entirely arrayed against sharing data in that way. But if we could demonstrate we can manage the confidentiality of that data appropriately, we can show the public health benefit of doing that, and I think the regulation adjusts accordingly. It might take longer than we like, but it eventually gets there.
Yeah, you did a nice job of sort of like connecting the dots on how we get there. I would have probably just shortcutted and said we're going to have to change regulation in some way to meet the challenge that AI presents because of the benefits that it brings. And things like GDPR are going to look pretty outdated in another 5 years in my mind, if we don't start putting pen to paper today, right? Start thinking about what does this mean in a world where we want data to flow freely. We want users to understand where their data flows, but we need to make some sort of use case that allows for this data to flow around and be additive to the innovative space of AI.
So we are ending on something of a positive note there.
Don't end there, Kayne, because I'm a little more cynical than Tom.
Uh-oh.
And I'm suggesting if we don't demonstrate a technical ability that we don't have today, candidly, I don't think we'll ever get to the point where the where the regulators will be enlightened enough to lighten up on this regulation to a point where we'll be able to really extract that innovation value that you're talking about. I think it's going to be we have to prove it first before they'll let us get there.
Yeah, you're probably right.
And being able to prove it, I think you're right. There is a technology hurdle there. And, when you were talking there, Dustin, I was thinking, well, we can't do like Netflix did with their data blinding, where they were like just going to obfuscate who the record was, because it's like cell phone data the same way. Like, person goes to the same place every day, person goes to the same house at night every day. You can pretty much figure out who they are. Netflix faced a similar problem when they were showing, our data is pseudo-anonymous, and here's our research set, and you can pretty much easily figure out who's watching what. So you're saying, though, just to get clear on this, we have to solve for AI to meet the premise that you have of better healthcare outcomes. We'd have to solve an encryption or a anonymization style problem at adequate scale without quantum computing to prove those values to the regulators, right?
Yeah, it's confidentiality at scale and shared data set. That's the problem.
Think about that just though. It's going to take some serious, you're going to have really strong backing and have a really solid stand to get in front of regulators and say, look, we did this thing based on this technology that you've not seen before and might not understand, and here's the outcome, and look at how good it is, right? That is, boy, that's going to be a spicy congressional hearing. My goodness. I hope that you don't get called up in front of the hill, because
you and I both.
That is not a good time for anybody. But with that, we're also running to the end of the show. I want to move to our beer reviews. And Dustin, if you haven't watched the show regularly, what we do when we have guests on is we all give a rating. Tom, our scale is still between 1 and 10, right?
It is.
And I say that for viewers who I don't think have ever seen me rate above a 5. The scale actually can go higher, including my scale. And so it's a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is the worst beer we've had on the show. 10 is something that Tom would drink and give out as gifts. So, Dustin, you want to go first for how you feel about today's beer?
Oh, I'd be happy to. I like this beer. I like a little more full-bodied beer. I like a darker beer. It plays nice on the tongue, all those things. I would give this one an 8. And I will tell you also, again, Tom has made me a beer snob. It's one of the many gifts he's given me. And this is one I could see as getting as a gift from Tom.
Wow. Okay. Got some Tom.
Subtle.
He's buttered you up for this one, buddy.
Yeah. As you can probably tell, right, with how much I've drank, this is a good beer. I like the porter style. To me, this is a perfect beer for like winters, right? So in the sort of the lineage of darker beers, heavier beer like a stout, I can drink one of those, but I really don't want to drink more than that. A porter is something I can have at least 2, maybe a third one on a really cold night, and it's a Friday, right? So I usually keep something about this thickness and darkness in the fridge in the winter. So I really like it, and I think it has incredibly dark, toasty notes, which is what I really like in a porter. So I'm gonna go with the 8 as well. I'm looking forward to the end of cold weather, but this is something I'll be drinking until that gets there.
Well, as you said, Tom, as you can tell by how much I've drank during today's episode, you can tell how I feel about this. I usually do give it it's got a stench.
We'll send you a White Claw, Kayne.
Oh, no, I'm not in college enough to be drinking White Claw. Oh, God. Some of these, like the oxidation actually improves it. Like wine, if you leave it out, it tastes better. That is nasty. I'm going to give it a 2. If you like bitter coffee that's been left out overnight and has like some mold growing on top, this is really that vibe. But with that, that's also all for today. And so if you think you know a beer I'd like, good luck with that one. But seriously, if you've got that or a FedRAMP question or another regulatory question, drop it in the comments below. And remember to like our LinkedIn and our YouTube pages to hear live interviews with other information security professionals like Tom's brother. Thanks again for being on the show, Dustin.
Thanks for having me, Kayne.